is a long time and the house at the end of the road. He is a recipient of a 2007 Guggenheim Fellowship and has been a fellow at the New American Foundation. Eubanks lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 3 children and is currently a visiting professor of Southern Studies at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. This evening, Eubanks is in conversation with Natasha Trethewey. Trethewey is a former U.S. Poet Laureate and the author of 5 collections of poetry, as well as a book of creative nonfiction. She is currently the Board of Trustees Professor of English at Northwestern University. In 2007, she won the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry for her collection, Native Guard. Please join me in welcoming them both to P&P Live. Take it away.
Right. Thank you. Well, my dear friend Ralph, it is so good to be here with you and with everyone else to celebrate and discuss this wonderful book and the complex and compelling place that inspired it. Before we get started, I wonder if you might read a little bit from a passage from the book for us.
Oh, absolutely. Since it's St. Patrick's Day, I'll start with one of the comparisons I make between Mississippi and Ireland. Like Ireland, Mississippi's history is filled with suffering that must be explained. It is a place that comes alive in its stories and inspires those stories, which flow through every bend of its winding rivers and across every piece of land within its borders. It is the beauty of the land mixed with the state's complex history that inspires and perplexes its writers. That is the burden one feels when writing about Mississippi, because it is a place that everyone knows about, or at least claims to, yet few are willing to understand. For better or for worse, Mississippi has become a metaphor for the entire South, and for that matter, even the entire nation. As Malcolm X said, as far as I'm concerned, everything Mississippi is south of the Canadian border. A story about race set in Mississippi is as much about the sins of the nation as it is about the sins of the Magnolia State. The American South, and Mississippi in particular, have, quote, existed never so much as a literal place than a figurative one, writes noted historian and Mississippi native Joseph Crespina. The Southern writer is forced from all sides to make his gaze extend beyond the surface, beyond mere problems, until it touches that realm, which is the concern of prophets and poets, Flannery O'Connor wrote in her essay, Some Aspects of the Grotesque in Southern Fiction. She very well could have been writing about Mississippi writers, since they all feel the need to describe the place with the greatest of intimacy, yet in a way that makes what is unique about Mississippi resonate with an air of universality. It is Mississippians' obsession with place, people, politics, and history that leads its writers to use the state to contemplate larger existential arguments with the greater world. Mm-hmm. The extremes in Mississippi's politics, history, and people leads to what novelist Brad Watson calls a high-octane treatment of place, which in turn leads to more critical poking and pondering. Perhaps that is why one of the most quoted lines from William Faulkner's Absalom, Absalom comes from his character Quentin Compson, who, when asked to explain the South, says, "You can't understand it. You would have to be born there." When pressed about why he hates the South, he says, "I don't hate it," Quentin said quickly, at once immediately. "I don't hate it," he said. "I don't hate it," he thought, panting in the cold air, the iron New England dark. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. Words that you and I both have said.
Exactly. Thank you, Ralph. You know, I want you to lean in a little bit more to your mic.
All
I
right.
saw a few people in the chat saying they were having a hard time hearing you, and I just didn't want to stop your beautiful reading. But you know, I don't hate it. I make use of that at the end of a poem, sort of transfiguring it a little bit and giving it to the fugitive agrarians who ask me instead, "You don't hate it?" But that makes me think about something else you discuss early on in the book, and that's about how there's always a point at which Mississippians find themselves in a position of having to defend their home state. I imagine that it's easy for people to assume that that is true for white Mississippians because of the history of racial violence in the state. But I'd like to hear you talk a bit about what it has meant for Black Mississippians, because I know that I have found myself many times defending my home state.
Oh, yes. I mean, more times than I can even count. And it's really different because I think that there is this sense that if you are if you are from Mississippi, you are this poor, tortured creature, particularly someone who, grew up when I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. That was the way a lot of people treated me when I got to the University of Michigan in 1978. You poor thing from Mississippi. And I thought, I'm not a poor thing from Mississippi. And I would probe and ask people, well, where is your family from? And it was from Alabama, it was from Georgia, it was from Mississippi. So people had the Southern ties, and that's why I note in this book that the idea of Blackness has its origins in the American South. And I think that's something that a lot of Black Americans forget. That, I mean, you live outside of Chicago. It's what I think that Thaddeus Davis refers to as the Up South.
Mhm.
So there's this linkage between the South and the North, particularly with the Great Migration. So yeah, I've had to defend it quite a bit, largely because I think that we tend to telescope all of our issues about race onto Mississippi and not necessarily looking at maybe where there's Mississippi that exists somewhere else, whether it's in New York or Massachusetts.
Mhm. It's almost as if Mississippi is supposed to be the sin eater that absolves the rest of the nation of its sins as well. And I think that's one of the reasons that I find myself defending it. This idea that somehow Mississippi is the microcosm of all that is bad, except that's not the case. And it's certainly not the very limited notion of it that would make us not be able to also love the place from which we come, the place that made us. Of the many things I think that are just amazing about what you do in this book, one of the most compelling is structure for me. I love the idea that it is uh, set out as a journey. I could imagine the map as metaphor, this idea that you pull out the whole thing and you have to put an X where you're going to start. And you're not sure where you're going to end up. I am very interested and was pleased to see that you started on the coast. Some people might have thought, why not start up there in Memphis? Someone else might have said, well, wait a minute, I could have gotten on a plane and landed in Jackson or landed in Hattiesburg or landed in Gulfport and started the journey. So I'd like to hear you talk a little bit both about the structure. You go into that in the beginning, how you thought to begin at the coast and why, and also how that geographic framework is laid over the temporal framing in this book, the way you move.
Well, I mean, of course, I have to say that your poem Theories of Time and Space was a great inspiration for where I started.
Mm.
And that idea of going down Highway 49, which runs through my hometown. and ending at Gulfport and looking out on the Gulf and bringing those blank pages and memories with you is what, that was a great source of inspiration to me. But I also thought about how the coast is a place that is constantly remaking itself, that it has to reinvent itself, very much unlike maybe some of the rest of Mississippi, which is steeped in Southern myth. You know, you're from the coast, I'm from the Piney Woods. Those are two parts of the state that exist very much outside of that Southern myth. I thought that would be the place to start. And then thinking about your body of work and Jesmyn Ward's body of work, and how, you know, two writers from the same region have changed the way we look at literature out of Mississippi. Then ending in the Delta, which is where I'd say that most of the scholarly thesis for the origins of Mississippi literature begins. Usually it begins in Greenville, Mississippi, with the Percy family and spreading out from there. And I thought I wanted to end there because I thought I wanted to begin with Mississippi's future, kind of end with where we have been, but also bring in some contemporary writers like my dear friend Steve Yarborough from Indianola, coming out of the Delta, and then taking us through Parchment Farm at the end.
Well, I was going to say there is that sort of end at the Delta, but what seems really brilliant to me instead is that you really end with Etheridge Knight and Parchment Farm and the writers that you encounter there. There's a photograph in the book that also sort of shows Highway 49 with Parchment Road across it. So it sort of makes me think that, okay, so the tributary that you took, you know, along with the Mississippi River is also Highway 49 and ending there at Parchment Farm. There's something pretty, I think also amazingly subversive about that, you know, because you do sort of begin this temporal framework as well as the geographic framework down on the coast with, as you said, with me and Jesmyn Ward, who are both Black women writers who are in our 40s and 50s. So we are a younger generation of Mississippi writers. But you also end, some of the last voice you give is to Etheridge Knight and to some of the things said by those prisoners that you encountered at Parchment Farm, and you give to them the credit of also being Mississippi writers. That seems kind of a brilliant and subversive framework that I think instead of makes the margins of those kinds of people, it serves to actually see them as the center. I think of Baldwin saying that the story of the Negro in America is the story of America. And even as you weave in and out of both things, I think you're always coming back to something complex about Mississippi. There's a place that you begin early on that reminds me of something that I've also encountered so many times. I think it's on page 17, you talk about a legacy of lost battles.
Yes.
You know, and I've been on panels, many panels with other Southern writers where someone, and usually I'm the only Black Southerner on the panel, and someone will say, well, how come Southern writers write the way that they do? Why these concerns? And almost invariably, someone else in the panel will say, well, you know, the South did lose the war. And I find myself,
you even have to name the war.
and I find myself being in the position of saying, well, my South didn't lose the war. So when we think about the lost battles, and you say that legacy of lost battles, and you say Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, one might argue if you just reshift the lens, that those are won battles for some of us. And I think this is more of a, you know, a dissertation about what I think you do is brilliant in the book, and a question. Maybe you can find a question in it, or just talk to me about it.
Well, I was trying to get to all those various contradictions there. And I too have been on panels where someone will say, well, we lost the war. And and I'm often dumbfounded. I don't have that good comeback that you've got, Natasha, but I may have to steal that one from
Mhm.
you. But it, we've often joked about this, that Mississippi's not a state, it's a club.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons I think that I kind of took this, as you say, subversive approach is I wanted to make sure that the people who weren't who didn't feel they were part of that club also
Mhm.
felt a part of this as well, because it's
Mhm.
their story. And I didn't want to just do this for, write this for the people who, like me. As I tell people, I've got the gold card. I'm an Ole Miss graduate. I
Mhm.
teach at the University of Mississippi. I can play that card, but not everybody in this state can.
Right.
And not everyone who's even part of the diaspora feels that connection as well. And for those who were part of that diaspora who felt maybe they couldn't come back, I also wanted to say, I understand you.
Mhm. Yeah, that you talk about that complex issue about either being able to come back or needing to get away, of love and hate. There's a lot of that really in the wonderful part about Willie Morris. And also the real need for so many of us to leave Mississippi to see it from a different vantage point and what that means. Can you talk about that experience for you? Because you've not moved fully back, but you've been back a lot because you're teaching there. And so you're kind of going back and forth between Oxford and Washington. But you went away
For a
for
long time.
college. Yeah. And so what was it? Can you even remember what changed about how you saw this place you're from?
I don't think that it really changed the way I saw it until I began teaching at Millsaps College in
Mm,
2016, because that was the very first time I had lived in Mississippi for any extended amount of time
mhm,
since I graduated from college. At that point, I think it was 35 years before. So that was when I think that I began to look at it very differently and realize that getting away allowed me to see the place with fresher eyes.
mhm,
And there was a bit of nostalgia that made me think, well, could I live here again?
mhm,
But then again, I started thinking it's probably better for me to keep one foot in and one foot out.
mhm,
Um, Thinking about, I think that's really what Willie Morris did. He
mhm,
was always looking at it from an outsider's perspective,
mhm.
but he played that insider's card.
Right.
That was his trump card, and I guess that's kind of what I have chosen to do as well.
Mhm,
And my sister Sharon and I often talk about this. She says, I don't understand how you can really go back. She's never really had the desire to spend time back here. And I often tell her, well, there's so much that I feel that needs to be done, that I can do through, trying to be that clarifying force about the way we look at this place. And
mhm.
I guess now that's the work I feel I have to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to think that you could have a graph that you could place so many of us on in terms of how we feel about coming back, how much we can take, when we have to get out. So, you talk about Jesmine being there and the description of her sort of loving the humidity as you stand there, but also that smell of sulfur. When I read that, I just threw my hands up because that reminds me of, North Gulfport, Mississippi, the water that came out of the taps, and I hated it. It, it smelled bad and it tasted bad. But for me, the thing about the atmosphere, that no matter where I am, if I feel that balmy air, if I feel that really hot air that's breezy, it reminds me of the coast, and I feel happy when I'm like that. But just like Willie Morris, The moment I set foot off the plane in Jackson or Gulfport, I start to get my back up a little bit. It's like I'm just waiting for some slight, some insult to happen. Even as the whole time I was packing and getting ready to go, I was excited.
I
You know,
know.
like, why?
Oh, yeah, I have been there with you. It's like
Mhm.
then you get there and it's like I got to keep my guard up,
Yeah.
and that's a it's a very it's a very conflicted feeling, and I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand,
Mhm.
but there's a real power and pull to Mississippi,
Mhm.
and I don't think you can ever really escape it.
No.
As I tell people, I may have wiped the map of Mississippi from my tongue, but it's still all up here, and it's entirely shaped who I am. Even though I've lived most of my adult life on the East Coast or up in Michigan, I'm still that boy who grew up on a two-lane blacktop outside of Mount Olive, Mississippi.
And I think that's what the people who think poor Mississippi, you poor thing, being from Mississippi, don't quite understand that I feel like the richest person because I come from Mississippi.
I
That
do. Yeah. There is a richness from this because there's stories about this place that um, that I share with people that I can't. That if you're from somewhere else, you can never really understand.
Mhm.
And that's the great joy about being from Mississippi. And I know you said that Mississippi kind of gave you your first wound
Mhm.
as a poet, and I think that Mississippi, I don't know if it necessarily gave me a wound as much as it gave me an idea that this is a place that I think I wanted to write. If you told me when I graduated from Ole Miss that I'd be writing about Mississippi, I would tell you you were lying. If you told me that I would be teaching at the University of Mississippi now at my advanced age, I'd also tell you you were a damn liar. So, but somehow it brings you back. And someone asked me, last night, well, is this just really a celebration of the state? No, it's not really just a celebration or a love letter. It's really, I'm looking very critically at the place, about the literature that comes out of it as a means of trying to understand it.
Mhm. Well, when you talk about a lot of Willie Morris's feelings, and that I think you say that he taught us that you could be critical of the land that you loved. And I really loved getting to that moment because it's one of the things that I've often believed that indeed it is the greatest act of love and of patriotism to criticize the land that you love in order to make it better. One of my favorite sentences in the whole book is, to understand Mississippi, you must probe the silences, because it is in the things people are reluctant to discuss that the truth lies. You know, you were also talking about that hook, that way that we are pulled back again and again. And I'm thinking about, you use a bit of another poem of mine, a poem called South, which ends my book Native Guard. And it's the poem's literary device is anaphora, this phrase I say over and over again, I return. And the poem ends, I return to Mississippi, state that made a crime of me. Mulatto, half-breed, native in my native land, this place, they'll bury me. And I really much have this idea that no matter what, I keep willingly returning, but the place is pulling me back also. On page 250, I just want to tell you how wonderful this moment was. This is when you are at Parchman, and you're talking to the class of prisoners who are writers there. And one of the things that you say is you've been reading Etheridge Knight to them. And you write, my focus when teaching poetry is language, making me realize I had emphasized Knight's wordplay as a scholar would, more than his raw emotion. The men focused on the unvarnished feelings Knight forces on the page because they can connect with the words in a way I never can in my speech and delivery of his poems, no matter how hard I try. That resonated with me because, you know, I've been teaching my graduate seminar in creative writing. And I actually, you know, usually we do talk so much about craft. And that's the scholar in us that says, oh, we have to talk about the craft of the poem. But so this quarter, I decided to do something different and focus instead on the idea of poetry as survival. Gregory Orr has a wonderful book called Poetry as Survival. And so instead, to talk about the emotional geography, the content that we need form as a scaffolding to bear the weight of. And the thing that you say so brilliantly is something about the here it is. Knight's words reflected the emotional regions of their lives. And I thought about the play on that it is indeed the emotional geography that they were connecting to with Knight, as well as this both real and imagined physical geography of Mississippi.
They really did connect with that emotional geography, which I found so fascinating. But this is the interesting thing that does not get mentioned here that I could tell you all here is I'm reading one of his poems, which has quite a bit of profanity in it.
Mm-hmm.
And they reacted negatively to hearing that out of my mouth.
Mm.
They felt that kind of as, you know, I'm there as the professor that day,
Mm-hmm.
that I shouldn't be saying those words.
Hmm.
It was so, and it was heartfelt. But then we talked about the raw emotion of it. They could relate to the emotion of it,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't want to hear me say it. And I thought maybe I didn't catch the inflection. I don't know. I listened to some of, you know, Knight's readings trying to capture that in some way, but you never really can if you're not the poet.
Right. Did they read it aloud themselves?
I got them to read it aloud.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the way that when we speak the words of a poem and feel them in our own mouths, we become the mouthpiece for that lyric self that's inside of a poem.
And yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get them to do that day. Instead of hearing me read it, getting them to read it.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference.
Yeah.
You know, it's always, I always say that teaching is like a tightrope act without a net. And
Right.
sometimes you're out there on that net and
Right.
you fall and you just got to take your bruises. And that was one of those days that I stayed on the tightrope.
Yeah.
I figured some way to do it. But there have been more than enough occasions where I've fallen off without the net.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Let me ask you something else just about writing this book. I'm interested to know where you actually began writing it, because I know that this is how you have put it together, but where did you start really, and what writer did you start with?
Oh, I really started thinking about how I put this together. I really pulled together, I was asked by Timber Press to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I did figure out a loose structure for it. I think the first writer I kind of brought into it may have been Eudora.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it. I think that's really where I started, was with Eudora.
So you didn't intend to write this book? Someone asked you to do it?
I was asked to do it. I was, you know, I was on my way doing some some other research, and I was approached about doing it. And the thesis was that it all began in the Delta.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I just said no. And that's when I started kind of turning around. I had been looking a lot at kind of the interaction between Faulkner and Welty. So those are kind of, and their distant relationship, but their intense connection as Mississippi writers. I think that in some ways Faulkner overshadows Eudora. Um, I see them as equals.
Mhm.
So I think Eudora was really where I started kind of thinking about going. I actually was in the house thinking about her being in that bedroom, hearing the piano playing from over at Belhaven, and thinking about Virgie Rainey in piano recital. That's really kind of where I started. And then kind of, as I tell my students when I teach creative nonfiction writing, we do a book proposal. I say a book proposal is a work of fiction.
Mhm.
And we're going to figure out what it is. And then along the way, things happen. Like that moment with Jessamine. That was not something I was really expecting to happen.
Mhm.
I actually stood there as she said that with my notebook
Mhm.
frozen. And so Willie's son, David Ray, was there doing the photographs. And he said, "You need to write that down." Because I was just frozen, because it was just, the hair went up on the back of my neck.
Mhm.
So it was, this is something I hadn't really planned to do, but it's something that once I was asked to do, I thought, I have to do it.
Yeah. I love how so many people who read this book will be able to take so much from it. People who feel like they know Mississippi and they know so much of this, I think will find things that they didn't know. Just as you say, everybody knows about Mississippi, but maybe you don't know about these things. I was really struck by all the different things that I learned about that I didn't know, including to go back to your comment about up south, given that here I am up south now, just outside of Chicago. I felt like in the movement of the book, in many ways, that I was on my own path of moving from the Gulf Coast and ending up here. I had a lot of family come here in the Great Migration, and you talk about that in the book. But the thing that really got to me, my mother here is over my shoulder.
Mhm.
She spent her senior year in Chicago. She decided to go away for her senior year. My great aunt Sugar had moved here, so my mother came to live with Aunt Sugar. I guess it would have been 1959, 1960. But my mother always called the wind the hawk. And and until I read your book, I had no idea that that was a term coined by African American migrants from Mississippi. Where did you even come across that?
Through folklore, doing some research on folklore, and that was something that Black folks talked about in the Delta. And you go through the Delta, you see the hawk flying through, and it's kind of a motif in blues songs. So it's really, it just moved north with them.
Yeah,
Um,
it
my,
made me
kids
feel
live
so
in Chicago,
connected.
and I was talking with them. They said, I said, "So the hawk's really coming through tonight." They didn't know what I was talking about. I said, "No, you've got to know about the hawk."
Yeah, wait a minute. Who didn't know? Who are you saying that to?
Oh, I think my daughter Delaney didn't
Oh,
know.
yeah.
And I had to say, girl, you need to know about the hawk. I got to just explain this to you.
Well, what I love even more is knowing that that word that I learned for the wind from my mother still has its origins in Mississippi.
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
Everything, all roads lead back to Mississippi, which is wonderful.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you might read one more passage for us, and I might then offer to take questions for you from the audience.
Okay. Why don't I read from the epilogue?
Yes.
Um, When I was growing up in Mississippi in the 1960s and 70s, there was no other prison in the state, making parchment a place synonymous with crime, punishment, and brutality. If you went to prison, you went to parchment. It was common knowledge that a trip to parchment was not just to pay for a crime. The purpose of a sentence at Parchment Farm was also to humiliate and break the spirit of those who pushed against the status quo in the state. It was Parchment in a section of the prison known as Little Alcatraz, where the state of Mississippi placed the Freedom Riders in 1961, and later other civil rights protesters for breach of peace. Several years later, in 1970, it was also at Parchment where an overflow of nearly 40 African-American students from the University of Mississippi were placed after taking part in a protest to call attention to a list of Black student demands. Humiliation has always been part of the punishment at Parchment. Its remote, nearly treeless location of 28 square miles in the middle of the Delta equates its very name with punishment of a violent, vindictive variety. Today, there is also a privately run prison in the Delta, in addition to other regional detention facilities that seem to pop up across the state. But Parchment's 20,000 acres command an outsized presence, both in the Delta and in Mississippi. The expansive network of fences, razor wire, and guard towers that keep its prisoners tightly inside Parchment's border make this flat expanse of land feel like a large gaping wound on the landscape.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm going to read a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
Here's one from Susan Cushman. Hi, Ralph. As you know, I'm a native of Jackson and grew up in the 1950s and 60s in North Jackson. But my grandparents lived in West Jackson back when white people still lived there. Your chapter, A Tale of Two Jacksons, is so good. There are so many good Black writers like Kiese Laymon and Angie Thomas telling their tales of Jackson. What white writers do you see coming up to continue the work Jerry Mitchell is doing to counter the silence about Jackson's violent past?
Oh, there's a whole group of them coming out of the Jackson Free Press right now that I think we're going to be hearing a lot from. And Jerry Mitchell's Center for Investigative Reporting is now headquartered at Millsaps College. So that's also going to bring that next generation of writers. And I'd also like to say, great things about the work of Katie Simpson Smith, who's from Jackson, whose work I really do admire. There's so many great writers that are being developed in Mississippi, whether it's at a place like Millsaps or the MFA program at the University of Mississippi, or Mississippi University for Women at their MFA program. So.
Yeah. You talk about a little bit in the book, just about the real irony that so much great writing has come out of a state with such high illiteracy rates. And one of your questioners, and I think it's one of the things we constantly also have to deal with. Do you remember who did the posters that said, "And some of us can read too"?
Oh yes, that was actually a kind of a promotion about Mississippi a few years back, and yes.
Yeah. So we even have to make a joke about that. But so this is Brian Anderson asking you, saying, I know you love Mississippi, but the state invariably falls at the bottom of every objective, subjective ranking of factors that influence quality of life. How do you think the state can rise from its traditional position at the bottom in so many ways and become a more functional part of the nation?
I think by embracing a new cultural narrative. I think there's been a regression in the way we have thought of ourselves as in Mississippi. I think particularly on the political side of things, which I don't think you can't talk about Mississippi without talking about the political. And Mississippi is the heart of the Southern strategy that the Republican Party started. And when I returned to Mississippi in 2016, that was when I realized how tightly gerrymandered Mississippi is.
Mhm.
Last night I was talking with a young person who's involved with Mississippi Votes. They're young people working in the state to get people out to vote to change that. I think that's going to be the beginning. But the other side of it is I also think we have long tied our whole idea of this place with this Confederate mythology that's now beginning to crumble.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that as we begin to think about ourselves as this center of American literature, that can change the way we begin to think of ourselves as a culture.
Yes.
And that is my great hope is political change, but also that political change coming through engagement with the literature of Mississippi and the South. I see the power of that literature to change young minds. I teach a class in civil rights and literature. This is last fall was my third time teaching at the University of Mississippi. It was the first time I had more than one white student.
Mm.
And it was because those students really decided after the events of last summer, I need to wake up and understand where I fit in the rest of this world. And that I had to turn students away from that class says something about where we are. And it's why I taught in person last fall.
Right.
I didn't feel that I could teach that class remotely.
Yep. Yeah, that seems to require being intimate, up close and personal.
Yeah,
No,
and the mass and distance, we still.
well, yes, I'm using that metaphorically.
Yeah, I know.
I was thinking about while you were talking about some of those changes, and I wrote about how when the flag came down, that I never would have imagined seeing that in my lifetime. I'm wondering if you ever imagined seeing that in your lifetime before it happened. And to add to that, my friend Pearl McCaney asked the question about the first time you read Light and August, which we both reference. What was that like for you?
Oh gosh. I'd say the first time I read it, it had a profound impact on me. I was a student at the University of Mississippi, and I realized that Jackson Avenue was where Joe Christmas took that walk, and that I used to take that walk regularly. And that really, reading that when I was an undergraduate here, and then reading it later on when I'm writing about my grandparents trying to understand their how people viewed my mother and her family as an interracial family. I thought about Joe Christmas, and I forget what Faulkner says about him walking alone there, and I thought about how my mother and her siblings must have felt. So it's like that book has meant different things to me at different points in my life.
Yeah, I read it because my father told me it was a book I needed to read. I think I must have been, 15 or something. And, my father was also a poet and a literature professor. And I think it was his way of suggesting to me something of what I might have to contend with. He wanted me to read it for that reason. There was another one. Oh, someone else asked this question. Mississippi has been experiencing a brain drain, the brightest of the young leaving as you did. What will bring them back, or is there a way to keep them in Mississippi?
I have long said that the way to bring people back to Mississippi, I think that this has been proven during this pandemic, is we need much broader access to broadband in this state. And when I began teaching remotely last spring, after we locked down, I had students who didn't have access to it. and it made a big difference. I had to record a lot of Zoom classes. If there are that universal access to broadband all over Mississippi, I think that people who are working remotely might even choose to come back and work here and live here, people who are from here, and maybe even people who aren't from here. You just have to look at how many people who've come to Teach for America in Cleveland, Mississippi, have ended up staying in the Delta and have kind of strengthened that community. And it's also a town that has access to broadband.
Right.
So I think that's so thinking about technology here, because to be honest, that's one of the things. Mississippi hasn't been very welcoming of the outsider. We want to try to make sure that we keep our ideas here. I think that's changing. That's changed a great deal, but broadband access could be a game changer for the state.
Oh, I just want to read to you a note from Sharon Eubanks.
I wonder who that is.
Yeah, so Sharon Eubanks says, "Thank you for taking me home in a good way."
Oh,
yeah, your sister.
Oh, good. Yeah, my sister has chosen not to come back, and I'm hoping that I can coax her back here, and we can travel some of these roads that we haven't been on together in a very long time.
Yeah. Oh, here's an interesting one. This is from Ted Atkinson, who says, "Congratulations on your wonderful book. And could you talk about the origin of the title of the work and what the word 'like' is doing in relation to what you're trying to convey about the state's image?"
Oh, well, it's a great, very good, because Ted reviewed this book for me, kind of going through, making sure I didn't slip up too much. And Ted was the one who pointed out to me the origin of this. First understand the world. You have to understand a place like Mississippi, but it didn't really come from Faulkner. And then talking with Joanne Pritchard Morris, Joanne says, I think Willie just thought that Faulkner should have said it. And in his book on, I think on Faulkner's Oxford, Willie just put that quote in there and it stuck. So she said, Willie was always doing that. So what is the like doing there? Place like Mississippi. I guess maybe that's trying to say that there are other places that are like Mississippi. They're not Mississippi, but they are like it. And we should be thinking about how Mississippi is connected with some of those other places. It's, as I said, we're just doing these series of conversations with the Humanities Council connecting Mississippi and Massachusetts. There's been some very enlightening conversations, particularly with respect to race and integration, the whole history of integration in Massachusetts. And I think people in Massachusetts have this small group that's come together, have come to understand, we've come to understand each place in a very different way. We've worked through a lot of the stereotypes we had about each other. And that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were saying that, how so many places are like Mississippi. The line from a poem by Elizabeth Sewell from Sounds and Cities. This woman was at Tougaloo for a long time, and she has a poem that really responds to Frost the Gift outright. But the poem ends, "We are all Mississippi." Well, that's not the end, but near the end, she writes, "We are all Mississippians."
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I think that, and she's talking about the nation and the way that Mississippi is in that, in the national imaginary, the site of so much of who we are.
Yes.
Oh, someone else is saying something about the hawk. Let's see. Ralph, you mentioned the hawk as a metaphor for the wind. What are some other ways the environment in Mississippi influences the reality and the image of this place?
The way that, ask that question at the way the
environment of Mississippi influences the reality and the image of this place. I think about the coast. I think about, for me, the metaphor of my coast is the the beach, the man-made beach, that in order to get it, you had to bulldoze the mangrove swamp and lay over something else. So it's like this palimpsest of sand and palm trees that are planted there that cover up what would have been there, erase it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that in the environment. I think I even talk about the hill country being looking like this, a blanket over a poorly made bed. You know, the way the hills kind of go here, and then just the flatness of the delta. Also, a delta sunset. There is nothing like a delta sunset. I don't know what it is, if it's the flatness of the landscape and the way the sun hits the horizon there, but it's the most, there are times I drive through the Delta and I time my drive just so I can witness the sunset.
See it. Well, I noticed, you know, how sometimes your descriptions of the sky, like a bruise, the color of a bruise. There was also that moment, I can't remember where it was, where you're talking about how the hill drops so steeply that it feels like you're at a beginning and an ending at once.
Yeah, like around Yazoo City. That's one of those places where it does feel like that beginning and an ending. Yeah, and that bruise-colored sky. It's what I always thought. The sky always looked like that every time I went to Parchment, and it felt like violence. And I guess that's really where that came from for me, is looking up there and hearing those gates clank behind me, and then looking up at that sky, and it felt like violence.
Right. I think maybe we have time for one more. This one is from Sarah Duke. To what extent is the experience of those growing up in rural Mississippi is the experience of impoverished and working class Americans in rural America? Are Americans who seek an education pushed into urban America regardless of race or class?
Oh, it's a really good question. My immediate answer is yes. I think yes, we are pushing people into urban America. You know, thinking about my little town, which is holding on by a thread, and there are lots of them like it. So yes, I think we are pushing. We're not thinking about how you could lead a full life in a place like that. On the other hand, talking with one of my dear family friends, Andrew Reeves, who was a county agent with my father, still alive at 93 and very sharp. When he told me the life that my family led there on that farm and being able to purchase 80 acres there when we did, that no one can do what we did today. And because agribusiness rather than small farms is driving the value of that rural land in Mississippi. So yeah, we still like to think we are a state of small farmers, but we are a state of agribusiness. And that is one of the things I think that is pushing people into urban areas and away from rural places.
Well, I'm glad at least that the other business of Mississippi seems to me the business of writing. And I'm so grateful that we have you in this business and this wonderful book. I just want to show it to y'all again and to say, please go out and buy it. I can't wait to take it with me and go back to Mississippi and follow some of the routes that you lay out and go to some of these places. And the hardest thing about reading it is that I couldn't write in it. It's such a gorgeous book, both the writing and just the design of it and the photographs. Usually I like to talk back to books and write in the margins. I couldn't even do that with this one. So I'm going to have to ask you if you can send me just a printout from your computer so that I can actually talk back, but not spoil this gorgeous book. Thank you, Ralph.
I can do that, and I'd be happy to take you riding shotgun with me.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
I need to talk to you because I think I might bring some Northwestern students down.
Good.
Yeah, so I'd love to come and have a class with you.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Thank you both, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I really want to extend a hearty thank you to Ralph and Natasha for joining us this evening, and everyone else. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host events without the book sales to support them. Please support Ralph and Politics in Prose by using the link in the chat to purchase A Place Like Mississippi. And yes, we do have signed copies. Please visit our website for the most up-to-date event listings. We do hope to see you there. And thank you for joining us this evening. And stay well read, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you. It was really, this book is so wonderful, and so surprising.
Well,
So surprising.
that means a lot that you think that, Natasha.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did not know where we were going, and I just thought it would be so easy to be nostalgic about a lot of things, and you're so graceful in this book, with how you handle very difficult things that might drive people away. You know, my mother always used to say, "You catch more flies with honey." So you're not shying away from saying difficult things, but you say them in such a way that even some, recalcitrant people are going to be moved by this. So,
Well, thank you, Natasha. That really means a lot to me. It really does.
all right. See you later. Thank
Okay,
you.
see you soon. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.